Hey, good morning. I'd like to call to order a work session of Wednesday, May 3rd. And first we'll have approval of the agenda.
Second.
All in favor?
Yes.
Okay, great. Next, we have public comment. Is there any public comment? Anybody online? Oh, Eric. Thank you.
Eric Ostrander, PO Box 97. I kind of wrestled back and forth about what I wanted to comment about today, kind of among a bunch of different things. I didn't want to take too long. I know we want to limit public comment to relatively short, 3 minutes, so we don't extend the meeting to 6, 7, 8 hours long. But I kind of wanted to touch on a couple of things. My wife's family has owned the Seabreeze Court here in Midtown since the 60s. They remodeled back in 2004 to the current building that we have now. And we have had guests staying with us since the way back when, people that were staying in the cabins when they were cabins that have transitioned over to staying in the new building. Things like adding additional lodging tax is extremely impactful for those families that have been visiting Cannon Beach for 40, 50, 60 years plus. And making those adjustments as a small business owner, as I'm sure Greg is well aware of this, as he's basically owner operator on site every day. We're on site every day, cleaning, checking in guests, making reservations. Those guests see every dollar increase that we make. We raised our prices once during COVID, but before that, we hadn't raised our prices since 2004. We try to keep the people coming to Cannon Beach that we want, the people that we all want coming to Cannon Beach, the people that are respectful, the people that are choking over spit, the people that are cleaning up after themselves, not leaving trash on the ground, the people that are respecting nature, that are respecting Cannon Beach for what it is, the character that it is. The reason most of us are here is we love Cannon Beach the way it is, and nickel and diming, increasing the tax. Last year, adding the 5% food tax was one thing. It's going to help emergency. It has helped emergency services significantly, but adding on an additional 2% tax or 1%, that's after less than a year of increasing the tax already on these visitors, is going to be extremely impactful for these families that have been visiting year after year after year, and that we've fostered, all of us small businesses have fostered bringing back year after year. And so there was a bunch of other stuff I wanted to talk about. That was the main thing I wanted to get at, is the character of Cannon Beach and how increasing taxes year after year after year is going to impact that significantly, especially for an event center that wasn't asked for by the people that run event centers in the community.
Yeah.
Something that the people that run event centers in the community don't think would be a net benefit to the event center population of town. And then the other thing was just an economics thing about where's the break point and within that curve of increasing taxes and price causes that drop in occupancy. And things for us, we're a small 12 room hotel. Losing one room is an 8% drop in occupancy for that one night. So we lose a significant portion for every person that decides to go to Seaside because it's a cheaper room, or go to Manzanita because it's a cheaper tax. Wherever they decide to leave us, losing one room is significant to us as a small business. And there's a number of other hotels, Webb's, Ecola Inn, Wayside. They're all generally small-ish hotels that see the major impact of incremental increases like this. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Hannah?
Good morning, Hannah Busher, PO Box 97. Just briefly, I'd like to mention about wants and needs. We're in a time in our community where we lack housing, we don't have great transportation, we haven't figured out parking, even though that's been identified for my entire life here as an issue. And that's something that we need to consider, as these needs that we have that we need to accomplish, rather than the wants of this event center, community center, whatever the heck you want to call it. It's been called a number of things during this whole conversation, but I think we need to identify the needs of the community and dedicate money towards solving those needs rather than accomplishing these wants that don't solve any of the problems that we face in the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Is there anybody on Zoom who would like to speak? So we'll go ahead and close public comment and open up our discussion item today is one topic only. The City Hall Police Station siding. Am I in the right
No, you're in the wrong meeting.
meeting? Sorry. We've had a lot of, I just wrote notes on
Next
last
week.
nights, yeah. So we're talking about with the lodging industry, possible funding aspects. And we have the city council here, and I don't know a couple of the individuals that are on our panel. So if you guys would like to introduce yourselves.
Sure, Greg Swedenborg with the Waves.
Doug Neely with Tollabonna Inn.
Scott Crookshank, representing the owners of the Stephanie Inn.
And Donovan Collins with Hallmark Resort.
Great. So would one of you like to?
Sure, I'll go ahead and start. What we're hoping today is to have some dialogue between the lodging community, of which we're four, and I've seen a few others in the seats there, but there's, I believe the accurate number is 29 hotels in town, and a couple of property management companies as well. So we have about 30 some odd entities when we say the lodging community that make up that community. As a group, we've been brought together and we've had some discussions about what has been proposed in terms of 2% lodging tax increase and how it's going to be funded and all the things that we were going to talk about today. Obviously, as an industry, there's some concerns. We've had increases in 2006, 2010, 2015, 2018, and now another discussion about raising 25% increase. Not all those were city, some of them were county and state. So, as an industry, yeah, we're concerned about some of the things, not only the plans, but being the entity or the industry that is asked to collect the funds that are being discussed for the projects that are being discussed. So hopefully today we can have some respectful and kind interaction and discuss and back and forth, some dialogue that you can't really get in a lot of the meetings. And that was our hope today. Also on the panel, Doug and Donovan and Scott both all three represent the businesses in town that do have event space to some extent. So there's a perspective there that we can get in this dialogue of what is needed in the community and what we have. So, I think with that, I hope we can have some good dialogue.
Quick question.
Sure.
You quickly mentioned the past increases in lodging taxes. Can you tell me again when those were and what they were?
Well, I believe, and
2000 started with 2000.
yeah, and I might be off a little bit. I'm going from memory here without my notes, but 6 was the increase from 4 to 6%. It was a 2% increase.
So that was a city
Yeah, that was city.
increase.
Uh,
And that one was before the state law was passed.
it was actually passed in 2003.
Oh,
I
okay. So that one does apply
Yeah.
to
believe that is correct. And
aided tourism dollars.
that was the 2% jump. That was a long time ago. And then there was 10 was when TAC was established.
Yes.
And 15 was when the marketing, what's funding the chamber to market for the city of Cannon Beach, that fund. That was 15. 18 was this county. In between those was the state increased to 0.8% for a while to fund the World Track thing in Eugene. And then they brought it back down to 0.5. That was statewide. And then 18 was the jail. And then now another proposal to go from, or discussion to go from 8 to 10%, which is, I think that's 25% increase. That 2%, that's what that 2% represents. And that's where we are.
Thank you.
Any other questions? So Greg?
Well, not at the moment.
Okay. That's
Hi there, I'm next. Again, my name's Scott Crookshank and I'm here to represent the owners of the Stephanie Inn. Thank you, Mayor Barb, councilors, Mr. St. Dennis for allowing us a time before you today. I'm here today to talk briefly about my experience in managing event facilities. I'm going to move really fast. I'm not going to take a long time because I know we're limited time, but I'd like to share my experience in an effort to share some level of expertise in these matters. From 1997 to 2012, I managed hotels and resorts with various sizes of meeting and event spaces. These properties were the Resort at the Mountain near Mount Hood with 15,000 square feet of event space. Surf Sand Resort from 2007 to 2011 with approximately 10,000 square feet of event space. The Governor Hotel, which is now the Senton Hotel with over 30,000 square feet of event space. And in 2012, I was hired by Metro Regional Government to be the executive director of the Oregon Convention Center with nearly 400,000 square feet of event space. In 2016, I was promoted to general manager of visitor venues for Metro with oversight of the Oregon Zoo, the Oregon Convention Center, the Portland Expo Center, and the Portland 5 Centers for the Arts, which is the Schnitzer, the Keller, and Hatfield Hall. I share this with you to let you know I know a little bit about event facilities, how they operate, et cetera. Some large, some small. I left my role with Metro in 2021. I had reached a point where I felt like semi-retirement was the best thing for me. I reconnected with the Snyder family, and now I'm here back in Cannon Beach, supporting their properties. My 24-year tenure in managing event facilities, particularly the 9 years of managing publicly owned event facilities for Metro Regional Government. Through that time, I managed several projects. Two notably were a $40 million renovation of the Oregon Convention Center that we were able to accomplish by responsibly putting aside reserves year after year to fund that without any additional ask of lodging tax or any outside resources. But probably most notable was Metro's effort to establish a headquarter hotel next to the Oregon Convention Center. Portland has operated in the visitor world with a beautiful, large convention center with all of the hotels that service that center across the river. So during that time, and I'm just going to go away from my notes for a minute because I lived it, but during that time, we had to determine what was there a need for a hotel adjacent to the convention center. We hired advisors to survey convention delegates from all over the country. Have you been to Portland? Will you come to Portland? Yes, no. If we had a hotel adjacent to the convention center, would you come to Portland? What size should that hotel be? What would move the needle? We learned from our convention delegates that what was really wanted in the community was a 600-room luxury hotel, no further than 1 block across the street from the convention center. So just fast forward a bit. The project itself was mostly funded by Hyatt Hotels and Mortenson Development, but a public subsidy was required because the cost of development wouldn't fully support the operations for quite some time. Through that process, we did a lot of diligence. We did economic impact reports on what current visitor spending looked like. Every visitor that came to Portland, for example, as a convention delegate, spent about $400 a day, we learned. And, that's hotel rooms, that's taxis, that's restaurant spending. So we're able to create an economic impact report of what each of these delegates meant to our community. We had advisors study the hotel product itself. How many rooms would it generate a year? How much TLT would those additional rooms generate? Everything from how many jobs would be created, how many more conventions a year we would do. We learned quite a bit about what that hotel could produce. They forecasted 10 to 12 conventions a year would come to Portland with probably 1,000 to 1,500 delegates at $400 a day spending. So a lot of math, right? To say this is a good project for Portland. The public contribution was being paid for by TLT. We had to speak extensively with the local hotel operators who Some didn't like public money going to a project, such as you're finding here today. Some recognized that the additional room nights that would be generated by these visitors would substantially impact their business model. At the end of the day, we had support for the project. We went forward with the project, and there sits a hotel adjacent to the Oregon Convention Center that is, unfortunately for COVID, very successful at this point. During those projections, we also needed to determine what level of business was going to be present to not only support the facility, but to support the debt service. We did projections. We were going to need to do a revenue bond for $60 million, right, for the public contribution. We did 30-year projections of TLT, looked at the last 30 years, forecasted the next 30 years. We added a 9/11 event into those forecasts, which decimated the hotel industry for some period of time. We also added a Great Recession element to those forecasts, which also decimated hotel business. We hadn't yet forecasted a COVID event, which you know. So I say that because in best case scenarios, we are surprised by events that happen in our community and in our world that can impact projections such as these. My main point is we didn't decide to go and get a hotel built without a lot of understanding of what the implications were and the costs. We didn't have a blank check to do so. We didn't have a community support without representing each element of the project. And I fear that might be what's happening here. I've attended a number of the meetings about this event center. Some of them by Zoom, some of them in person. I recall in one of the first meetings, which I attended Zoom, I input, I think, 5 questions into the conversation. And I asked if this event center was going to be a revenue generator for the city and if any forecasts had been done. The response that I received that night was that it's too early in the project for that. We haven't done anything like that yet. Today, I think you are that far into the project, and I don't think those projections have been done yet. I don't know of any revenue forecasting. I don't know of any economic impact analysis. I don't know of any studies that have been done to determine if tourist demand exists. Just that our local community wants this. I understand the local community wants this, but I don't even know if that sentiment is true if the community were tasked with paying for it. Last night, you discussed putting together a committee to provide input on the center and how it would be managed. You already have local individuals that have submitted their names. The subject changed a bit to what level of experience are we looking for in committee members. The discussion actually became a bit puzzling if you were watching the discussion. And I say that respectfully. It's new territory. Somebody said, we want 2 counselors on the committee. Somebody said, we want people that have event facility experience. Somebody said, we don't want opponents. We only want people that have event facility experience. We only want people experienced in public facility management. Not sure if that excludes nonprofit or indigenous groups. We don't want people that have managed large facilities. Our facility is 10,000 square feet, 7,000 square feet gym. We need people with that type of experience. I think you're looking for a unicorn because I don't know that you're going to find the people that have the experience you're looking for, but don't have the experience you're not looking, that have the experience you're not looking for. So even putting together a committee is a challenge because with all due respect, there may not be the institutional knowledge or experience amongst the council to fully understand the project. So in closing, I would urge you to step back, hire some consultants that can guide you to learn what the product most needed any is for this community. If it is intended to be paid for with TLT, be sure to have them do studies on visitor generation, revenue generation, have them calculate economic impacts of those additional visitors to see if those visitors provide a return to the community to fund the debt service. Have them forecast additional visitor spending, additional jobs generated, TLT growth. Hire an industry consulting professional, not a committee of community members, to guide you on operating models that make sense. Please do your due diligence, a thorough cost benefit analysis. Only then should we really move forward on a project like this. Thank you for providing me this time.
Thank you. Questions?
I would like to do it after each person speaks, or would you, the council prefer?
I think if you have a direct question with that person, now,
Yeah, I'm saving a lot of questions, but
oh, you
I,
are, okay.
but I, first of all, I'd like to thank Scott for being here. I thought his, feedback on some of this would be very helpful for us. So, first of all, I want to say that. So, what's the budget for Oregon Convention Center?
The budget is operating revenue in the 30 million-ish. And then it is supplemented with TLT to the tune of about 20 million a year. So about $50 million.
Okay, so I think you answered my next question. 20 million is from TLT for that.
Right. And the generation of economic impact to the community is roughly about $80 million a year. And that's through jobs, spending, visitor spending, et cetera.
Good, thank you.
Any other specific questions?
Yeah, I
for Scott?
definitely have some questions, but
If you want to wait until the presentation, that's fine.
no, I'd like to bring it up now. It's that
Okay,
there's been two speakers and each of you have addressed the event space, but we also have a city hall and police station that we need to deal with. And I'd like your thoughts on that, if you have prepared them. If not, I understand.
I was saving my questions along that line too, because I thought we were here to talk about police department, city hall funding.
Yeah, I think
Really, well, it's a big part of it, isn't it? Or are we here to
No,
talk
the
about
TLT isn't going to police station and city hall.
if we raise the TLT, then
It's not going to city hall or police station.
That's.
then 30% of it, 30% of it. would be
30%, I guess.
applied.
Okay, you're right.
So,
You're right.
I mean, I had the same response as Brandon. I was like, okay, we're talking about the event center. What I think the big picture we're trying to solve here is a police department that's not in the tsunami inundation zone and a new city hall that
it's
address my questions and let you answer.
quite possible we're not here for the same conversation.
Yeah,
That's fine, and I appreciate your candor about that, but it is our concern as a council. And I just want everyone in the room to know that we're not trying to raise the TLT tax just to fund this event space. We have other needs. And I'd like to open up that dialogue. If it's not right in this moment, I'd like to keep that going because the need is not going away. And at the very least, our police department is in absolute dire need of being redone. And I don't think that's a need that the community has made. I guess what I'm trying to say is I have never seen anybody not be in support of that. And if you're willing to give your comments on that now, then I would much appreciate it.
So I guess I think after you hear from myself and Donovan, we could always circle back to that.
Sure.
Like Scott and I think the rest of us here, we were under the impression this was to address the community center, event center. So I think we may have had a bit of a disconnect. Yet we understand the two are related.
Yeah, I don't think that's incorrect. It's all part of it, but I just
Sure.
wanted to, I guess, expand things a little.
Yeah. So so if I may, maybe I'll just go ahead and jump into a few things I'd like to share with you. So
I just want to say,
yes.
I thought we were here to talk about the possibility and the impact here from the lodging community about the impact of raising the TLT tax, no matter what we spend the funds on. That was my impression, that this was not about where we're spending the funds or whether we should do an elementary school revamp or not, just the idea of whether or not we should raise the TLT tax for whatever purpose.
And I think that's definitely part of
I thought that
our,
was
our
it.
agendas should be today. but-
My impression is that that's what the panel thought too, but maybe I'm wrong.
Well, I can't speak for
That's
the
part of
panel,
the
but
conversation.
I'm happy to just share a quick, give you my 2 cents worth. I think the reason why the two are related is because to build the community center, or what is now being referred to, I think, as an event center, it has to meet certain criteria as a tourism facility that's also going to bring tourists into the community. That's one of the reasons why we're here, is to talk about our opinions about the need for an event center. A community center on its own wouldn't qualify for a reason to increase the TLT funding. The only way you can get the funding to help you with the police and city hall project is through an increase in the TLT, where you can take 30% of that revenue to dedicate it towards that project. We're saying the 70% that would go towards an event center for tourism related purposes is what we're wanting to speak to today. If that makes sense. I don't know if that helps.
And I totally appreciate that. So am I incorrect in what you're saying is that you're not opposed to the tax being raised for the 30% to be going towards the city hall and police station?
Well, from my perspective, I think that the concern is getting back to the need for a community center or an event center.
Okay.
If there isn't a need for one, I think it would be a poor choice to go ahead and try to build it, increase the funding, call it a tourism center, when indeed I think it's more along the lines of probably a community center. But if you don't mind, I'd like to just go ahead and go through some of my talking points, and that might help kind of set the stage a bit, as well as Donovan, and then we could maybe just circle back on that if you don't mind.
No, you say whatever you want.
Okay.
Happy to hear it.
All right. Well, again, I appreciate the opportunity to meet with the council, and I think that this is an important issue for the community and certainly for our industry. I began working in Cannon Beach in 1974, shortly after the Tolovana Inn was built. So I've been in this community for nearly 50 years. I think I have a good sense from my perspective of what Cannon Beach is about, what it is, what's important to the local community, and then also how that helps serve the business community. Of course, our industry, as well as the other businesses in town, employ a lot of people. And I know that there's that balance that we always want to achieve between for the locals having a nice community that they can enjoy. But then there's that flip side of the tourism element that for some locals, they find that a bit challenging and disruptive to their community. So along those lines, it's that fine balance of, do you want to entertain a project that, in order to qualify for the TLT funding, has to help promote tourism and bring more tourists into the community. As we touched on earlier, 3 of us here have meeting facilities on site. When we renovated Tolovana, and that renovation was completed in the year 2000, we added 2,500 square feet of meeting space. So for the last 20 years, we have been operating that, and we understand the needs, we understand the marketing, we understand the staffing, the infrastructure that we have to have an event center, a meeting facility that meets the needs of those people wanting to use it. I can tell you that it represents a small portion of our overall income. It's a facility that's not occupied heavily, even though we promote it. We have a sales director, we have an on-site sales coordinator, but it's not the reason why we're in business. We built it basically as an amenity to the hotel, and And frankly, in the summertime, we have such a demand just among the FIT travelers, the independent travelers, that we don't really need to go after the group business. There's just such a demand, and frankly, staffing becomes a challenge as well to try to service the needs of those groups when they want to come during those peak times. So I think that, and that kind of touches a bit on what Scott had referred to earlier, as far as really having a good plan in place if you're going to invest in a facility like this, because having done it for the last 20 years, there's a lot that goes into doing it because you want to do it well. It's important that the people that come, if it's a tourism facility, and utilize it for that purpose and have events there, you want to be sure that you have all your ducks in a row and that it's going to be a successful event. I guess one of my questions, I came into this process a bit late, and so I was a bit puzzled as to what it was that drove the interest in taking what had been, as I understand it, purchasing the elementary school, because I think the original intent was to do that for a community center. And from my perspective, it seems like we already have the Chamber of Commerce, we have the park next door that can also serve as a community center for the local groups that would want to utilize that. But I was just unclear as to what the discussion was that led to determining that there was a need for an event center. I myself hadn't been contacted or made aware that it was something that the council was interested in considering. I think, and again, I may have missed it, but I think if you would have come to the lodging community and asked us if we felt that there was a need for an event center, we probably would have told you absolutely not. I think between those of us that have the space now, I think that there is the availability to host many of those groups that would be coming to Cannon Beach. I think that the proponents, just from what I've read and the council meetings that I sat in on, I think the local proponents really see this facility as being a community center. And as such, I think there may be other funding resources. I'm not saying that it may not be a good idea to have a community center, but I'm just not sure that the TLT could be justified as a funding source if that truly is what it is. So I thank you for the opportunity to speak. Happy to answer any questions, but appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. Anybody have any quick questions?
I'll save my questions and comments for when we get to more of a general round, but I again want to thank Doug for being here. I've worked with Doug for I don't know how many years, but not 50.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay.
First off, thank you, everyone. I'm Donovan Collins, the Hallmark Resort. Thank you for taking the time to meet with us and to ask kind of our input on this and where we feel this is really going. I'm very new to the community. I moved here just about 19 months ago, to which I think makes me not as well suited to address a lot of the concerns, but at the same time, because I'm looking this almost from an outsider's perspective, I'm trying to understand certain aspects of it. And there are questions that I have when looking at this from a project point of view, trying to understand a little bit about the project itself. So I was recently introduced to this, finding out that this was going to be a proposed lodging and tourism tax, and I knew that it funded all three of the projects. But that the one project, as Doug discussed, is what it hinges on. And it hinges on being a tourist destination, which is defined as someone that's more than 50 miles outside of our area, to them coming in to use the facility. And so when I looked at that and tried to understand the scope of this, so a few questions came to mind for me. We haven't yet determined a need, from what I'm understanding, for having this facility, just specifically this facility, not the police department and the city hall, which I will address separately. But do we have a financial projection in place of what this will cost? not only to build, but to run continually. And I ask this in a way as if I were a lender, if I were a bank and you came to me and said, can I have 2% more money? But you didn't have a plan, I would be remiss to just say, sure, here's 2% more money. So the impact on our guests about it possibly bringing less tourism to the area could mean that we have less revenues to provide that money as well. If we're looking at the contributions from the businesses over the last few years, 21 and 22 were phenomenal years. And we accept that, but we are reverting a little bit back more to what looks like 2018, 2019 from the leaders that I've met with in the industry. And so that revenue might not be what you're projecting if those are the numbers that you're using. Is there a plan in place for if those revenues, if those contributions are lessened? Do we have a backup plan and a stop for when that will hit? And then lastly, I was a little bit concerned about the site itself. As I researched it, trying to understand, this is going to be a fairly expensive facility. And it looks like, again, from my limited information and an opportunity I've had to research it, this is in a zone that projected for a tsunami zone. And I feel like we're investing quite a bit of money into an area that has a potential to be damaged or demolished during a tsunami. So it feels like if we deem that area is not the best area, why would we invest so much money into that particular area, knowing that it has a really high probability of that happening? In regards to the three areas, the police and the funding for that, I think that I understand the need for the two facilities. I truly do. But it feels like this is being forced a little bit into a tourism facility. And while the other two facilities, that 30% hinges on this 70%. So it feels like we're trying to force something to fit that 70% so that we can get the 30%. It's just my personal feeling and observation because again, I haven't been involved in the discussions up until very recently. So it's difficult for me to try and forecast our business in the future saying, will this reach a point where we're pricing ourselves out? We're maybe losing on occupancy, struggling then to get employees or balance the amount of people that we have in the area for a project that doesn't make sense in the first place. And so I'm hoping that someone can help make a little bit of sense of that and help me understand if we're really forcing the two in. I do believe that there are funds that are in place that could fund those other projects, but I don't think that forcing a project for the convention center or for that type of event center is the way to make that happen. I think we can look for the funds other places because as we've said, the community wants these other things. I think that we can find other revenue sources for that.
Any general questions for Donovan?
I don't have a question, but welcome. And I can't speak for council, but for myself, I feel like the critical funding we're looking at here is for a police department and a city hall. We're certainly very well aware of the 70-30 split on the use of TLT dollars that would be the result of any increase. And I think we've looked at the, you seem to be calling it an event center when we haven't necessarily even decided whether what we're looking at is an event center. We've certainly decided that we want it to be a tourism facility and not a rec center. So we're still really early in the process there of even defining how we meet that. But any increase in lodging taxes is obviously going to put a big pool of money into the TLT. And one of my questions dedicated lodging tax dollars. And part of what I want to get to is how do you want to see those spent? And I don't think we want to answer that question now, but
Maybe I could provide a hypothetical. If the goal is to raise lodging tax to be able to acquire this 30%, involve the tourism and hospitality community on what would be the best use of that 70%, rather than put it toward a product that the lodging and tourism community doesn't understand how it supports visitor growth. That would be my response to that is if we need to raise lodging tax to get that 30%, let's all come to an agreement on how best to use it to impact the machine that brings visitors that spend money.
And I feel like that's what I'm here for, is to have that conversation. Whether it's, and I don't know, it seems like, you like to say event center, but again, it's not necessarily an event center. We've talked about cultural center. It's a significant historical site. But I think that's the conversation that we need to have.
And I think that's one of the reasons why I tried to discuss what diligence would be appropriate to determine whether a cultural center or an event space or whatever types of activities or presentations of interpretations would be present, what impact that would have on the visitor experience, whether it would generate new visitors. I would even honestly ask whether many members of this community want more visitors, as we know that, August is pretty rough, right? Is there a way to develop a program to bring visitors in the off season? Kind of instead of having this, something that looks a bit more like this. There's probably reasonable uses for those dollars that could be focused on shoulder seasons, perhaps, if the goal is to gain that 30% somehow.
I like to ask the whole panel a question, and that is, if this money was being spent, we raised the TLT tax and the money was to be spent on a project that you thought was beneficial to the community and the tourism business in general, then would you be in favor of raising the TLT tax?
I think possibly to a lesser extent. I think that depending on what we're looking at building, and I think that that's very important, is we look at a need and what will generate for the community. I think that it's difficult to say if we built something you wanted, would you allow us to, or would you be in favor of the tax? It's with a blank check to be able to build anything. Of course, people are going to have great dreams of what would happen, but from a business standpoint, we have to look at that impact of that tax and the impact of what we'd be putting in place. Would it be a mechanism that helps to generate off-season revenue that helps to help with it? But I think that just to have the tax itself without saying, we want the tax, but not really what it's going to really be designed for, is difficult for us to get behind. So it's difficult for me to get behind any amount of tax.
I'm trying to find out.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that very straightforward question. I'm trying to discern whether you're against raising the TLT tax specifically for this project, the elementary school, or if you're just generally, no matter what the money is spent for, not in favor of raising the TLT tax. That's the question I have.
I think each of us may have our own independent thoughts about that, so I'll just share mine. First of all, we have 177 rentable units. We have our own advertising budget and our own marketing plans that we utilize to bring tourists into Cannon Beach and specifically to Tollivana Inn. But the community benefits from that with the number of overnight guests that we have on an annual basis. Eric had touched on this earlier. Our TLT taxes are already at a level that is important to guests when they're shopping the market for accommodations. And we have to be sensitive about increasing those costs to the traveling public more, because it's very competitive out there. And we do have a strong repeat customer base, like many of the properties here in town. But there's going to be a level where we start getting pushback. And when those taxes start approaching $30, $40, $50 a night, that becomes a potential game changer for those people determining where they're going to stay. I think the tax right now from the lodging community, and certainly from our perspective, is at a reasonable level. we don't see a need to increase the TLT funding for any specific project to help bring more tourists to the community. And I'm not sure that the local community would necessarily support that. Again, trying to maintain that balance between the culture that many of them envision for this, great community that has a history of being a great village and arts community. And of course, we have a lot of natural resources here that are a huge draw for people. But do we really need to bring even more people into the community? And essentially that would be happening from April to October. And I just don't know that there's a need. So for Tolovana Inn, we do not see a need to increase the TLT funding at this point. That's not to say that if there were a project that we felt would have some benefit and would meet the criteria of bringing in people from a 50-mile radius or further out and an overnight stay, we'd be happy to be in those discussions and take a look at what some of those options might be.
How do you respond to the idea that if you look at the different TLT taxes in other communities close by, like Seaside, Manzanita, et cetera, that ours is one of the lowest. In fact, it is the lowest except for Gearhart, I believe, in this area. Seaside's taxes rate is higher. I believe Manzanita's is higher. So we had a chart, and I'm sure you've seen the chart. And so
Sure.
isn't it almost like you're asking us to subsidize the hotel industry by having a lower TLT tax than any other of the local communities?
No, I don't think that
That's
you're
your way.
subsidizing our industry. I think it's the opposite. We don't need the TLT funding. The TLT funding is in place to help promote the community. And I think that the current funds probably are doing that at a level that we need. I would just question whether or not there's a need for an additional increase. And it seems like the number has gone from 1 to 1.5 to 2 to 2.5, keeps creeping up. But again, we're not hearing really what the overall plan is. But we also, like we've said, we understand the importance of the relocation of this building, getting the police station, city hall into a safe zone. But like Donovan touched on, we want to get that into a safe zone, yet we're looking at another roughly $15 million project that would be within the tsunami zone that we know has already had a history being hit.
Recognize that it is lower than other communities. That's true.
Yeah, but I think each community, go ahead, Greg.
No, go finish your thought.
I was just going to say each community has its own individual needs. It's not that one number fits every community.
So to that point, I mean, people bring that list up and we're 8% and Seaside's 11 or whatever it is, 11.5, 12. But you also, nobody talks about what the revenue per available room is, that rate. So we operate at a much higher rate per available room of inventory than other cities. So, still at 8% generating twice, 3 times, it depends on the city you pick, but multiple times more than any city. And if you compare TLT brought in by the city of Cannon Beach to the city of Bend, so 90,000, 100,000 people, 1,500 people, we bring in about half of what Bend does as a community, and that's at 8% versus their percentage. So just going through a list of you're at 8, you're that, Seattle's at 22, Portland varies depending on where you are, isn't a look at the whole picture. And, to your question before, Lisa, would we support an increase? I can't speak to the lodging industry as a whole, but me personally, I wouldn't. I would be very cautious of raising the lodging tax for things that are needed, that fund the things intended at OSR 320 with either visitor center or marketing and so forth. And a case in point that I personally go back to is when the county raised the 1% for the operation of the jail. Does anyone know how much Cannon Beach sends to Clatsop County on a quarterly basis for that or on an annual basis? But it's hundreds of thousands of dollars, and you divide that by the number of bad guys that were taken to the county jail in Cannon Beach, and it's a very high percentage. We're actually we are contributing as a community way more than any of our other, Astoria, Warrenton, Gerhart, Seaside, on that. So to the point of like chasing the 30% by, finding something to use the 70% for. I look at that as the same way as what the county did, and nobody in the city was involved in that process. The county sprung that on the city, which is, if everyone remembers, that's kind of why there was funds to buy the school property. Before that, the school sat there and there was no plan for a community gathering spot. And there may be ideas, but there was no funding. There was nothing. That kind of just came out of the blue. And it was a case of where, in this case, the county chased the 30% to solve a problem and then left the 70% to be used on something, related towards tourism, which is what started this process. Unfortunately, I think if we continue to do that, you're going to put a lot of money into some big projects that were intended to be, I think when it started out, everyone was a community gathering space, and now it's going to become a cultural center and it's become an event center, and we don't know what it's going to become. But raising taxes and having the people that pay that, which are really the overnight visitors, it's not the hotels, it's the people, and the high return rate, the 60, in my business, it's around 60% of the same people coming over, and those are the people that are paying this. Is that needed? And to Donovan's point, do we need this? And, are we just chasing the 30%? That's where I find concern.
Do you have any idea how much higher your room rates are than on an average in Cannon Beach than they are in neighboring, like Manzanita or Seaside, or is there no figures on that?
You can figure it out. I can't say an exact number, but what do you think the RevPAR in Cannon Beach in the middle of the summer is? Probably in the 4s. Somewhere.
Yeah, I would
If not
bet
higher.
it's between 30 and 40%, I would just guess.
Higher than any other city, and if you compare Gerhart that has maybe 100 units, it's not, you can't. If you compare Manzanita, which is obviously much, much smaller, but increasing, Seaside, more units, but a far less average rate. And therefore their 10% tax, they have more rooms, so they're 10%, or I think, what are they, 12, 11 something? They're a few points higher than us. But if you compare the two, Cannon Beach generates more revenue.
I think too, it's, you take a community like Manzanita, they don't have a lot of hotel rooms, but they have a lot of short-term rentals. And the short-term rentals really are the ones that are producing probably one of the highest ADRs, average daily rates. So you have that mix between your hotel properties and then your short-term rentals that are just commanding much higher nightly rates as well as additional fees.
Thanks.
I guess I have some questions about the chasing the 30% and the I can't remember how you phrased it about how much money we spent on the jail for how little use, especially Cannon Beach, gets out of it. But again, I keep coming back to City Hall because that's in my brain. The big question here is, we've been talking about the need for a new City Hall and police station for probably at least 2 decades. We purchased a property out of the tsunami inundation zone. We took the prepared food tax to the community and they voted narrowly to approve that, which provided some funding for this. And we're still short, obviously. And I mean, again, I can't speak for everybody, but I'm trying to find a solution for this. And we're a city that, thank you all, 80% of our total revenues come from some source of tourism funds. So we are subsidized by tourism. And I'm not one to take raising the lodging taxes lightly. But I would like to see the lodging industry be a partner in making this city hall and police station happen. So I don't know, how many of you have toured the city hall? I mean, have you been to the planning department? Our planning department is inside of a trailer that's kind of backed into an area of the building and covered over. Have you seen the police department?
I don't think the lodging community doesn't agree that those are worthwhile projects for this community. And I believe the lodging community is already supporting projects such as that with the percentage of the lodging tax that is available to the city.
So you think
Most communities
in the budget now,
most communities go to their full-time residents in the form of property tax measures to gain money for emergency services types and libraries and those types of projects.
I think our city hall and our emergency services are what they are, or they need to be what they need to be, not because of the residents. It's because of the tens of thousands of visitors that are here at any given point. So I am not sure that.
As you mentioned, 80% of the budget is generated through
Yes,
visitor taxes.
so you're saying that
There is a lot.
in our general budget, we should find that money?
I've never been involved in the city budget planning, so I couldn't possibly answer that.
And I haven't as well. This is my honest answer, and it's only my honest answer. It's not the lodging industry's honest answer. It's not the position of any company or person, but if we have a certain amount of money for a project and we're trying to find more money, if we don't feel that the justification for that more money is there, could we modify the scope of the project? I believe that these services are needed. I believe we need a new city hall. I believe that we need a new police station. I'm not arguing that point. I'm saying, could we look at those projects and say, here's the funds that we have available currently? What can we do with what we have currently, as opposed to, I'd love to have this. And this is a poor analogy. This is a school in Washington that did this. They were putting a fountain in their lobby and we're just like, and they were going to increase taxes for that. The fountain wasn't needed. I agree with building the facility to the needs that it has, but could it be scaled down to fit within the budget that exists?
Yeah, I've heard it's too expensive, it's too lavish, it's too big. And rather than just say that, I would love for someone to actually make a case for where it's too big, where it's too lavish. I feel like we've been looking at that, and I don't think it's any of those things.
I don't even know where you're gonna put it yet. Where has that even been decided?
Not really, not completely.
So, I mean, it's hard to make a comment or, feedback on whether it's too lavish or too this. And we hear the numbers at 21 million or whatever it is, 16 to 21, 2 or whatever. But that's so far down the road because we don't even know the site. In personal, I don't want to speak for the lodging community specifically on this, but it feels a little cart in front of the horses in that, we don't have a site, don't have the plans, haven't raised taxes yet, but are looking at that and having that discussion. Are there other ways to get that? And, property taxes was one. I've heard that come up in a meeting and then it was quickly, kind of went away. Looking at the food tax, nobody wants to touch that because it's very fresh and new and understandable. But it wasn't fully implemented the way the other two cities in the state did it. So there's money on the table. There are obviously looking at lodging taxes, but is that most efficient use of getting money? And that's where I came up with my chasing the 30% idea, because I think we're talking about getting revenues in all these different ways, but the plans of whether it be a police station or a community center in the school nothing's, been nailed down. And so it's very hard to answer your questions of would you support this or that, because it's very vague in general.
I guess it's kind of where we're at in the process. Lisa, go ahead.
I'm just trying to, I guess I'm still confused by some of your presentations because you haven't been talking about specifically how the raising the TLT tax would affect your business as much as that you don't like the school project. And I don't, I mean, the school project is a work in progress. We don't know at this point, we don't know a lot of things about that project. I'm trying to figure out how raising the TLT tax 2% when you already are charging more per room than other places on the coast, like Seaside or Manzanita, as far as room rates, why you think that raising a tax 2% on an already very expensive room is going to impact you so negatively. That's what I'm trying to figure out. I don't care about, I'm not thinking about the school, where the money's going. I'm here to try and figure out what your problems are with the idea of raising that tax to be commensurate with other towns along the coast.
Maybe I could at least share some perspective. What we have seen as a presentation that was around the Cannon Beach Rejuvenation Project and the presentation on budget for it and where those funds would come from for the budget. So we set that over here. There's reasonableness to why we're commenting about the Cannon Beach Rejuvenation Project. We saw a presentation that showed scenarios of funding it with 2% lodging tax and 2.5% lodging tax. So I think that's initially why we came. Your question around, are we opposed to any tax at all, right? I think the question that you're asking is probably the right starting point, is there a tourism product that the lodging community could support that would be beneficial to increasing visitors, creating more lodging tax that can fund more opportunities and sets aside the money needed for the other projects. That's a great starting point for a conversation. We're here because we feel like the conversation was already around budget, how much would be raised, how it would be spent, and no conversation.
Well, how would raising the lodging tax 2%, how would it affect your business?
I think it would depend squarely on if those dollars were used in a way that would generate additional business and occupancies, particularly around the off season. It could be fine. It could. I think there's analysis and studies that could be done. And none of that has been done.
So you're saying if it would benefit the lodging industry in the long run, then raising the tax.
I mean, lodging tax is, if used properly, is a tool that generates even more revenue, right? It's kind of a machine, right? You spend the money wisely, more visitors come, creates more tax. It creates more spending in the community, creates more jobs, creates more opportunity for gaining and growing that 30%. So you kind of want that synergy. If the dollars aren't used in a way that is propelling those numbers, then why spend it?
Okay, I understand.
I think the conversation you're describing is the conversation we're having. So, I mean, yes, some preliminary work has been done. We've got some ideas. But I feel like that is the conversation that we're in the middle of.
Again, we've only seen the presentation on Cannon Beach Elementary Rejuvenation Project and the sourcing of lodging tax for that project. And today to question whether that actually.
I think it may have been a mistake to, it was actually looking at the impact on both projects. And I think the whole idea of the event center has taken over the stage here. But I think the conversation about the dedicated lodging tax dollars are the reason I wanted you guys here.
Mhm.
And I'm, very well aware of the law and, the money can either be used for marketing or it can be used for tourism facilities. And maybe that means we need to make the grade school more of a tourism facility, as you've described. Maybe you have other ideas about how it could be used. But I mean, that's the conversation I'm here for. I'll just talk about the need for an event center. I've worked with most of you. I've worked with Doug for years. I've used the surf sand ballroom. I've used the Hallmark rooms. I've used the chamber rooms. I do have a background in event management. And there is not a facility of that type here. Or one that can be used for community events. For years, I tried to get the surf sand ballroom, but it was priced way beyond anything a community event would be able to afford. I've been fortunate to work with Doug for a few years and, we've been able to use the ballrooms there. Hallmark is very small. So I gave up on that long before your time, but I think there is an event need and I think it can be an off-season event need. And I'm not sure, I'm just throwing out a stream of consciousness, it feels like, but tsunami zone, I don't think we can live our lives thinking that the big one's coming. And, I think there are lots of properties that you all manage and operate that are in the tsunami zone. So I'm not sure of that argument that we shouldn't be spending money on something in the tsunami zone. I don't know, I should be quiet and
Fine.
more people weigh in.
I appreciate your comments, Gary, and I certainly appreciate the panel. And what I am hearing is that perhaps we haven't done as good a job communicating with your industry, what our needs are and what your input should be. We, as a council, operate in this room, and you could call it a bubble. It can act that way. COVID hasn't helped, other than we're now able to stream on YouTube, and we do have more people, but we try to get community involvement, and I'm acting now. We want your involvement. We're not here to be adversarial. The tone may turn that way on a dime. It's kind of what these city council meetings do. I don't personally feel that way. What I would like to do for the community is to provide something that enhances the community and guest experience in here that will help you. And like you said about the event space, the grade school, this is an evolving project, but the need for a city hall and a police station is not going to go away. It's gotten exponentially more expensive than when we first looked at how much it would cost back in the 90s at some point. And it will only get more expensive. You know all of that. You are involved in projects. And I guess I'd just like you all to look at it from a standpoint of what we can do to try and make this community better.
Lisa's going along the line of questioning about what damage will it do. Let me ask another question that maybe actually something that's answerable. Greg mentioned all the previous TLT increases. What has been the result of those increases? Have we seen business go down after any of those? Maybe you don't have the answer off the top of your head.
I mean, I just kind of go back to it. No, because at the same time, we've taken the revenues from those and invested them in marketing for, so example, the contract with the chamber. You would see in our spring and winter increase tremendously through that investment. So
That's some great marketing, if I may say so.
So, and it's not just that. I mean, it's the state of Oregon is promoting itself. It's the economy at any given time. It's how many days the sun comes out. You know, there's all kinds of factors there. To Lisa's point, and I try to, how would I articulate this? And when simple math is, if I have a room for $100 a night and the expectation of the visitor is they want their budget and the value of being wherever that room is $100 a night, they come looking for a price, and with a 10% tax, it's now $110 a night and out of their budget. So to get them to where they need to be so they're not driving on down the road or not making that reservation, we lower the price of the room.
108 to 110. See, I mean, that's the difference. Not $100 to 110. They already were paying an 8% tax.
So you're not counting the county or the state too.
Right,
We
okay.
do.
But I'm talking just about,
Oh, I know, but the person paying for that room is not paying 108. They're paying
right, okay.
110.5.
The jump is not from the basic room rate up to the,
No, it would go from 108 to 110.
right,
Or no, I mean, I'm sorry, it would go from 110 to 112.
okay, right.
So, which is 25% increase?
Not in the room. It's like 100, it's an increase in the tax, right?
Tax.
If people are
So-
looking at their pocketbooks, they're looking at the cost, the entire cost of the room. They're not saying, well, I can afford $100 for a room and I can afford $10 for tax. They're saying, can I afford $110 a night? That, they're not breaking it down in their head. When you rent a room, you don't sit there and break down how much of it is tax. You look at the whole picture, how much the room is.
Correct. And when that tax, I'm using simple math at $100, but when it's $600 a night room that sleeps 8 people or a house or what have you, that 10% becomes hundreds of dollars. And it will affect, and not so much in the summer because we have more demand than supply. But in the off season, you'll start to see prices decrease, and then the actual amount of tax revenue generated or collected would decrease along with that. And from a business perspective, I mean, I don't know how many tourists you've talked to. I've answered the phone 5 times this morning before coming into this meeting and talked prices and talked what it would, what it cost and how it's different in March than it is in August. And people are, especially now with inflation and all of everything, they're conscious about what that is. So yeah, on paper, it's a 2% increase, but when, the guest is doing it for their entire family and they're covering that, $3,000 a week at the beach or whatever it happens to be, it's more than a few dollars. So that's financially, plus they're now from trying to, make a business whole and make money in a business and be successful and hire employees and pay living wages and things when a place where we have no housing and a place where there's very few employees. On top of that, we as businesses pay like OTA fees, 15% for, I guess most usually pay to the Expedias of the world and so forth. Visa takes 3.5% or Master, American Express 5%. So all those little things add up. And if you're not on the business side of it, you don't necessarily see that, but that tax, all those help, increase that room rate. So when we sit here and I do it with easy math with $100, it only seems like a couple bucks, but the average tab is much more than that.
And is the price of rooms in Cannon Beach so much higher than in other communities on the coast because Cannon Beach is so spectacular? Is that why you charge higher room rates than other communities like Manzanita or Seaside?
Not necessarily. I mean, I think there is a demand, every time Cannon Beach gets put on Condé Nast or something like that, there's definitely a demand or a spike in that, and it is. But our costs are higher too in a lot of cases. I mean, personally, my water bill went up quite a bit when the city changed the water rates and the per meter adjustments. So my room rates changed. You know, when the wastewater costs went up, all those kinds of things, you know, equate. So it's expensive to do business here too, as well as, and then, you know, I already mentioned the housing and employment and stuff, but that's, you know, would a 2% increase hurt that? Hard to say. Me personally, and again, not for the lodging community, having 2 properties on Spruce Street and having an event center that is going to host events that has no parking, and that back door to the school becoming basically a through street for parking, that'll hurt my 2 properties, I believe. You know, so I'm concerned about that. That's not tax related, but just putting that out there. So that's why, you know, the plan for City Hall and police station, you know, the 60 some odd percent of people that are return guests all the time, or the 80 some odd percent that pay the TLT today, you know, is it their responsibility that we have a new police station, City Hall? Not necessarily. And Gary, you just made the point of, you know, the reason the City Hall is needed is for, you know, the infrastructure of this town. I still would like to see the community have a little more input in that rather than just one industry. That's my 2 cents.
Thank you for answering my question, though, because you did answer it. It was nice to have it addressed.
Yeah, and I think we're having this conversation because none of us, okay, I'm speaking for council. I hope none of us want to do anything that would adversely affect our lodging tax collection. Clearly, that's what butters are read here. But I would ask staff I would like to ask staff to take a look at our history of lodging tax collections and show me the results from the following years, whether we've gone down, whether we've gone up. I know that's not necessarily a complete story, but at least it is something that will inform us. So is that something we can?
Think to help you do that, yes.
But you're
Thing starting tomorrow, and
Mhm.
see you then, Greg. You won't be at the budget meeting?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, if you won't. As part of my point is that
Yeah.
the previous years will be
They're there.
there
Okay,
to a certain point.
we just need those dates of when they were raised and to be able to look at the increase or decrease in the following years. So I'm sure we'll be able to extrapolate that. It'd be nice to have it in a handy form that we can really take a look at it.
And can I speak to a threshold? I mean, we look at all of those years and we look at what the guests are paying. The guests see an end dollar amount and they're looking at the product and they're going to hit a point. Like I would pay $10 for something. Would I pay $12 for something? Would I pay $14? At what point have I outpriced that and I look somewhere else for the same product? So yes, the $2 might seem like a small jump from 8% to 10%, but there is going to be a threshold. And that's what I'm worried that we're going to hit. And we are going to start pricing out some of our long-term guests that when they look at the course of a 1-week stay or a couple stays during a year, that small amount is just enough to push it out of their budget that they had set aside. That's why I feel that I don't support that increase.
I think
I think it's one of those things where, you know, the days of a $100 a night room are gone. And in relation to what the other communities are charging, again, I just wanted to remind everybody that it's not just the hotel rooms that are a part of this. We have the short-term housing. And so if you look like at a community like Manzanita, you know, houses there are renting for about the same amount of money as what they're renting for here. And the hotel rooms, the few that there are in Manzanita, it's kind of a supply and demand, have a fairly high average daily rate too, that would be comparable to probably a number of the properties here in Cannon Beach also. And of course, in our business, there's a revenue management component. We have to be very sensitive about our rates because we don't want to get to a point where it affects occupancy. And so if we get to that tipping point and all of a sudden we have rooms that are vacant because they chose to go elsewhere because of that rate, now we've all lost out on that revenue. And so we do have to be very mindful of ensuring that our rates are following suit with the demand and the marketplace.
I might just add that the cost of operating has gone up significantly in the last few years. We all know the inflationary issues. And so as we look at what a potential guest can tolerate, the increase in lodging tax isn't the only increase they're absorbing right now. We have higher cost of labor. We have higher cost of goods to put into our hotels, higher cost of food products to put into our restaurants, causing us to have to raise our prices to margin as well. So those things all have to kind of be looked at holistically. When you look at what's the cost of a hotel room, it's different than it was a few years ago, even without an increase in tax.
But all the communities are suffering the same way, not just Cannon Beach. That's not, unique to Cannon Beach.
That's right. We're not isolated here. I understand that. But we do have highest probably rates in the community. And so the impacts could be a bit heavier. And I think the hotel owners are continually needing to invest in their properties as well to maintain that appeal to Cannon Beach.
So I have a question for you. If you could go back years when the school was vacated in 2013 and it sat empty there for many years. From a lodging perspective, what would you have done if to utilize that space? I mean, you when you drive into town, you see a place that used to be full of magic and children's voices and the elk stayed away pretty much. And now you drive in and you see, I mean, the questions that I get when I'm down at the food pantry is, what is this place? As they look for a parking place to come in, what would you guys have done with that property to help your industry?
I'll speak. I believe it is a wonderful entrance to Cannon Beach. Having the formerly Lumberyard and Public Coast Brewery at that end of town, that isn't the most populated area of town, right? So getting people into that part of town is due largely to compression of downtown pushing people out. I always feel like private developers will really determine the value of a piece of land and what might happen there. Not to say that public development isn't appropriate at many times, but I asked the question if that land would have had value to a private developer and a private developer would have bought it, what might they do with it that would be a business model that would be successful? And I don't know what that business model is, quite frankly.
What else?
My comment on that would be from a lodging facility perspective, wouldn't even be on the radar, really. The amount of, and I'm probably one of the closest hotels to it, downtown, the amount of meeting convention type business that we have in town is very small compared to, and weddings and things like that, to just the recreational visitor. So while the facility was there and when it was, even before it was for sale by the school district, never once did it cross my mind like, hey, this would be great if the city did this. So that's my lodging answer. As someone who has lived here a majority of my life and has two kids that are being raised in this community, a community where when it rains, they have nowhere to go inside and nowhere to play basketball or pickleball or whatever. As someone who grew up and went to that school and did my Christmas recitals in that gym, I would love to see it used as something like what everyone envisions and so forth. So we're a community that has something there. But as a tourism related facility, I think it's a bit of a stretch. I mean, I remember the Haystack, Portland State Haystack Arts Program things, and I like to think that that would be, you know, a great way to do this. But, you know, in the summer with no parking, so you're going to come in and over the bridge, and the first thing you're going to see is a parking lot because everyone's parked there because there's no parking for the facility. That, as a tourism facility, I have concerns with that, for that. So, but as a hotel, the need to like, oh, I wish we really had convention space, and was never really on the radar. And in fact, I've tried to leverage our business to use the community hall, the conference center, I mean, not a conference center, the chamber hall, because we're less than a block away. And the efforts that I've put into like, oh, you can have your wedding there and stay with us, and it's kind of like you're there. It's a drop in the bucket compared to normal business, and not something I don't even focus on anymore. So.
Well, you've been on the Tourism and Arts Commission for how many years?
4 now, starting my 4th.
And it seems like everyone receiving those grant funds has said there's a need for an event facility. Is that?
That is true. I mean, people do say we can't host this event because we have no place to put it, or the 1 or 2 in town are very expensive and so forth. And the community hall, as it is today, the chamber, maybe isn't large enough. And as others get large, you know, it would be nice to have a venue for things like that. I do agree with that. But I also think from 2010 going to where we are today, the 13 some odd years, the needs of Cannon Beach have changed. So back then it was like, hey, let's throw a festival and bring people in here in the middle of April. Well, last weekend was completely full without any, I mean, I guess that was 2 weeks ago was Get Lit, but you know, was that the driver, or is it just that Portland's expanded, you know, we've become a world destination and that's driving it. So yeah, I think as long as we continue to hold events to draw people here, there'll always be a need for space, but those will be the, what, 10, 12 events that we fund. And so now the city is taxing the visitors to raise money, to give money to people, to advertise events, to bring more people in, and then paying for a facility that they can use. So none of it's self-sustaining. It's all coming off the backs of the TLT. And so, and I could say the same for, and I'll get in trouble saying this because everyone has a place dear to their heart, but HRAP, farmers market, you know, there's a laundry list of things that are funded by that really don't have any return in the scope of things. And I'm concerned that as an event center, that is where we'd be going.
I guess I'm guilty of helping turn this back onto the event center, which again, I'm not really sure that that's what we're talking about there. But I don't know, I would sure like to keep the focus on how we can fully fund, since we've already got property. And you talked about siting, and maybe we should talk about that a little bit. But how can we fully fund the police department, emergency services out of the tsunami inundation zone? I think we're close to that. And then there's still some question about siting of City Hall, especially. And it seems to me like I would like to solve that. And I think Scott's got some ideas, and I would love to hear more. As Brandon points out, I don't think it's going to get any cheaper. I don't necessarily think there's going to be a better time. I don't necessarily think we're going to find some, you know, new source of money that's going to fall from the sky. But it feels to me like the dedicated tourism portion of his lodging tax funds is a big question. And that we kind of need to handle those simultaneously. And if we are going to use TLT funds to fund, again, partially fund police department, city hall, then to me, it's a big question about what to do with all those dedicated tourism dollars. And I think that's a conversation that we've started here, but it feels like we need more.
What is the annual gap on the debt service for the police and city hall? Is it like $300,000 a year, or I know it was in your presentation.
It was 3 to 6.
Pardon me,
3 to 6.
3 to 6. That's the number that's being sought, right? Is that gap?
And my comments coming as a citizen, not as a lodging group, but, and I haven't watched every meeting, or I've been to every meeting. I watched some. But I do recall, we'll look at all different avenues and quickly, whether it be property tax, whether it be increasing, there were a couple of things brought up, or belt tightening, where can you save money? And as someone on the budget committee, I should probably know a little bit more about what's going on there. But quickly just went right to TLT, and I'd never heard any discussion pro or con of any of the alternatives. I mean, I've seen Bruce's presentation on a couple of things that talked about them, but never really heard the discussion. So I mean, that's my question to council is, if someone said has going out for a bond for property tax, has that ever been fully vetted? Or is that just off the table?
I wouldn't call it off the table at all, Greg.
I'm asking,
I definitely discussed it. We've also discussed raising the TLT tax, and that's why we're here in the room together. Without these conversations, we won't be able to move this forward. And I'm sorry if the conversation isn't happening, the way that you'd all like, but I think we're making progress. And I'd like to see this move forward in a similar fashion. And I suppose we've left the impression that we need this all done immediately. And yes, I'd like that to happen, but clearly that isn't going to happen. We need some more information to make the decisions that we need to make in siting and funding. And we need community input to do just that. And I'll leave it at that.
And I think we have talked about whether it's reasonable to do a bond, send a bond to the voters. But I just don't think that's appropriate, asking the limited number of residents here to pay for a city hall and emergency services that has to be at the level that it is to accommodate the guests of our town. It just feels to me like I would love it if that was a part of the formula. It seems appropriate, but I don't think, trying to fund the whole thing by a bond would ever work, that it would be appropriate. But I would love to see it be part of the formula. And we've talked about the food tax, and I think no one wants to go there again. So we're trying to sort this out.
But it's not funding the whole thing, it's funding the gap. So we're looking for, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
Total debt service is like 1.5 million. And then the city portion of the prepared food tax is 900. And so the gap is like 655.
So it'd still be fun. Nearly half of it, was that?
There's 1.5
We're
million,
still looking for nearly half of the debt service funding,
a little bit less.
a little bit less. So again, given that our property taxes right now pay for slightly more than 10% of our city's operating expenses, to me, that's a reasonable number to expect that the city might put into a city hall police department. But I mean, that's a tiny little slice.
Has the the benefit of a beverage tax added to the food tax. You said you left a little on the table. I'm assuming we're talking about didn't do food and beverages, did food. Has there been any calculations on what beverage tax would generate? I mean, that's
12 to 15%.
so $150,000.
Pardon?
Like $150,000 or something.
Yeah, I
Not enough.
think my opinion on it and might be shared by others is, you know, that passed by 4 votes
7.
and 7 votes.
Higher 5.
And it was super divisive.
Can I,
And I'm not sure that, you know, we're up for that kind of fight again. I know I'm not.
I wanted to go back and answer Barb's question about what would we envision that facility? I'm an outsider. I have no emotional tie. I didn't grow up here. I didn't go to school here. But I see a need. And when I look at Cannon Beach, of a few things that I think would be phenomenal. I love an event center in regards to having a place when the winter, pickleball, things like that. I think that also a park space and parking. And I think that we could charge for parking. That's my personal opinion. And I think that that would generate revenue. And I don't know the space well enough to know what could or couldn't be taken down to make this facility happen. But if you're asking me what I've thought would be phenomenal in the area, it's that facility. I would love to have a place to be able to send people in the winter like that and the community itself. But then I think that the parking could generate revenue. And I think it would solve some other problems as well about people just parking very willy-nilly, for lack of a better term, throughout the city during events like Sandcastle and other things that are such a huge draw.
Talking about paid parking on the site or paid parking in town.
I'm speaking specifically to what I think that site would have been great for. Had I had a magic wand, had I been here in 2013 and looking back at it, you know, again, from not having went to school there, not having the ties, just if I could build a piece of land, that's what I would build. And hopefully that revenue would help to fund what we're trying to supplement. So.
We've had a couple of people in the audience that have raised their hand. If you would like to briefly speak. Mr. Ramey, go ahead. Come on up. With respect and kindness and 3 minutes.
Thanks. I'm Tim Ramey, PO Box 429 Cannon Beach. I make these remarks as a citizen, not as a member of the Budget Committee. I also make these remarks as the owner and operator of an events facility. We own Zenith Vineyard. It's a 28,000 square foot building, 11,000 square feet devoted to events. We compete with the Governor Hotel for, I know the event space very, very well. And it seems to me there's a win-win here. There's an absolute win-win, which is we don't want events in the summer where we have no parking and the rooms are already full. We want events in the winter. And if the city sets up, if I were playing God, the city would set up a management structure where they would say to a management company like any one of yours that you have 60 nights a year that you can book events, but they are in this time frame. They're not in the summer. And that would absolutely make this a win-win. We would generate revenue for the city. We would generate room nights for you all. We would not have a parking problem. And it just seems this is totally about seasonality. Let's just think about seasonality. We don't need an events facility in the summer, and nobody wants that. We want an event facility in the winter. In the summer, it's a cultural facility for our visitors that are here or for our residents. That's my point of view.
Thank you.
Can I make one other point? Gary is 100% right on. Yeah.
You've never been accused of that.
He's 100% right on the fact we don't have anything that resembles wedding space or conference space, business conference space. And you have to understand, and I think everybody here at the table would tell you this, the only people who pay to actually use event space for weddings and businesses. The Bridge Club doesn't pay. So you have to include the whole idea of weddings. When we built our facility, we were going to make it 250, up to 250 guests. And we had people talk us into going to 350. That cost me another $1 million or $2 million. But it was exactly the right decision. And you need something in that 350 range to make this work for events.
Thank you. Pam?
Hannah Busher, PO Box 97, forgot where I get my mail. Thank you for allowing me a few more minutes. I would just like to bring up that geez, it's a long day. Councillor Hayes brought up that 70% of the city is funded through lodging tax and through food tax. And so I'm not hearing a good reason why we should increase it. Eric has done a lot of research on the different property taxes around the valley and around the coast, and our property tax is lower than many other communities. And I think that we should consider that heavily when trying to fund the city hall and the police station. As Gary said, you know, a lot of the reason why we need a bigger city hall or police station is due to the amount of tourists that are that come to our community and visit our community, but also I feel like we need to pay our fair share as well. And I don't think it's fair to just go after the hotels and the food and try to increase that when we're not paying our fair share of the chunk of it. Many of our properties are worth more than everybody's houses in town. So if we did increase property tax, we would be paying more than most residents. Bruce's number from a couple weeks ago was that it was $1.95 per $500,000 house valued, which really, I mean, our house is worth $250,000. So, you know, we're living in a small shack versus a lot of people, but our property tax really wouldn't raise that much to help fund this project. So I really wish you would consider looking at property tax rather than just focusing just on hotels and well, apparently food is kind of out. So thank you.
Doug? Run up here, you're using it 3 minutes.
Deputy PO Box 1426, and I really appreciate all of your input. It really got my creative juices flowing. So I'm all about creative juices. So let's talk about that. It is a Native American sacred site, the school. So we all have to look at that. HRAP, Audubon Society is involved. I was instrumental in getting the North Coast Rocky Habitat secured now for more protections. Audubon's coming down this week on Thursday to do training on the black oyster catchers. That's huge for bringing in business for you. It could be a discovery center. That can help business conferences, wedding. I have the Nordic Northwest, and I'm going to give you their stats. They're fine. You've already got them.
Thank you.
On what they're doing, same size building. And they're bringing their money is what they're bringing in. Anybody else want one? We have to look at other similar projects, which I can find out. We need to educate them on all of this. And the city hall and police station, it's all about emergency services and being ready in any kind of event of emergency. And police and fire are overloaded now with tourism. So we have to have compassion for that. And I vote that we share the love, okay? I think I'll pay more property taxes. You could pay 1% instead of 2%. We can think of creative measures to do this, and I'll share for the benefit of Cannon Beach and I can figure out all sorts of ways to increase tourists down here. So, and I'm gonna write it up for you and you can contemplate it, okay? And thank you so much. You know what I like is dialogue and you know, creative thinking, and your background is incredibly valuable. So I appreciate you coming and thank you.
Thank you.
Can I follow up on the historical site thing? And I don't know if, you know, if everyone has
Governor, go ahead.
if everyone has the whole picture of not only the opportunity of that site, but also some of the limitations of that site. It is an identified Indian village. It actually appears in the Lewis and Clark journals. And, you know, a chapter that talks about what happened in the Indian village on that side of the creek. There's been archaeological studies there showing the footprint of an Indian village. So there's both the opportunity and the limitations, because the whole project has not evolved the way I saw it. Because I wanted to see something different there. I wanted to see some on-site parking and a different footprint. But we're dealing with these limitations of this historical site. And I'm not sure how to get around that other than abandon it or just let it become a park. But I do think that we need to recognize the historical significance in it, and I feel like it's something we can take advantage of.
Well, the whole,
Here we are talking about the
whole design is based on the fact that it's a historical site, the whole design that seated it. So that's the basis for this whole project.
everyone wants to talk about the tourism facility. I have been trying to keep my focus on
Cultural
and
center.
City Hall and emergency services funding. I mean, we're actually in that position where we can get an emergency operations center out of the tsunami inundation zone, not wedge the police department into a disgusting little corner back here. To me, those are the first question to be answered, and then hopefully satisfying you on the use of the resulting dedicated tourism portion becomes kind of the next phase of that.
There's a hand up on Zoom
I'm just gonna ask about that.
that Patrick wants to.
Okay. Good morning, Patrick. Patrick.
He's coming here. Second. Yes.
Good morning, Patrick.
Good morning.
Like he's still.
Yeah.
Hey, watching this from afar, it's been very impressive to see this dialogue between city council and this panel. And I think Donovan and Scott and Doug and Greg for representing really well. And I'm so pleased to see that there's this vetting back and forth, and love to see more of it, because I think this is how we create opportunities to move forward where we're all winning and getting something for it. I agree with Gary talking about City Hall and the police station, the importance of addressing those issues. But one of the things that we kind of go over all the time is this parking component. Lisa and I were in Sedona this past weekend. They had a very attractive kiosk that I entered my license plate number, put in my cell phone number, and paid for parking. And it wasn't exorbitant, but it was a resource. And I really think if you combine the city reserves, if you combine a parking resource component, that I don't know why we don't push that, maybe a geo bond component and TLT, then we can address some revenue streams that's going to benefit everybody. And I just wanted to put that in. And by the way, thank you so much.
Thanks, Patrick. Is there anybody else online that would like to speak? Okay. Well, believe it or not, we have another meeting. I'm sure all of you have things you need to do too. So I would like to thank everyone for the conversation. And let's not stop. Need to, I think, things for the betterment of this community, try to keep a balance of residents and visitors. And anyone else have anything they'd like to say? Yeah.
Would it be beneficial? Chamber of Commerce. This was a great conversation. and thank all of you for representing the lodging community. But I hope this isn't the only one.
Right.
I hope this can continue. So along that line of questioning, how would you like to continue as a council?
Let's have some more meetings.
I think we need to get a little further down the line to have something a little more concrete.
Well, one thing we're doing is we are having a meeting that will focus on where the city hall and police station will be located, and that meeting is on the 16th. I think we need to have that meeting as well. And then we do have another meeting scheduled sometime this month on funding. So what?
The
30th. So we will be having those meetings. So as we have those meetings, we would hope that you would please be included, and please feel free to come and talk to us about those, because that is basically where we are. As you said, we need to have a plan. We need to be continuing to talk about this, which we do plan to do. So please join us for that. Then maybe we should go back and talk again to the lodging folks once we get some of those decisions made this month.
Does that answer your question?
I just want to make sure
Stay
we
tuned.
continue this.
Yeah, I think we all are.
Have this just be a one time, we've had a discussion and now we're gonna move on. I think having the lodging people here today, arranging this meeting, because it's difficult for people in business to take the time to come and have this conversation. So I don't want that to go to waste. I really want the business community, the city, the residents, I would love to see us all towards this goal. And the only way to do that is to have conversations and have these happen. And so I want to make sure that we at least put it on your guys' plate to have those conversations. Don't forget everybody.
Right. You're not checked off the list yet.
Appreciate the time today and totally appreciate the challenges that are before the city, particularly around the police and city hall needs. We all value those services.
Thank you for taking the time.
Gave us some very valuable information. We
Yeah.
do appreciate it a lot.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Meetings adjourned.